sorry you saw it happen.
Let's talk about The Last of Us Season 2, Episode 5, Feel Her Love, name of the episode. Patrick Klepek, overall thoughts on this one?
I thought it was a really strong episode. I'm getting worried about where it's going to end, given the truncated nature of Season 2.
Doesn't feel like that much is going to happen this season.
We'll get into this in another podcast, but I think our predictions on where it was going to end, I would now be shocked if we actually made it that far in the game storytelling. But putting all that aside, and what I played of the game, like taking the episode on its own terms, like really strong. The revelations we're getting about like what's actually happening with the infected, the introduction of Spores, an Airborne version, is a deliciously scary new way for all this to work. The new like kind of smart infected, I think are really effective. I think the final sequence with Ellie and a sort of really radical personality and attitude transformation. I was sold on that. So I have my concerns that we're about to get half or a quarter of a real season of television before we don't pick up on this story for 2 years, like before the next season, if we're following traditional markers of television production in this day and age. But if I try and put all those qualms aside, genuinely, I thought it was a really strong episode. Bring some characters that I really like back into the mix. I like kind of where everyone is at. It leaves things kind of unexpected and interesting. And I'm excited to see where the show goes next.
Yeah, I thought this is a pretty solid episode. We get a little bit more details about how the spores work, as you said, like how the cordyceps work and other methods of transfer. We also really get our first look at the Seraphites / the Scars and kind of why there is so much enmity between the WLF and the Scars, and that is also relatively effective. So decent episode, and normally I would say this feels like kind of like an in-between episode, but then I'm not sure, like there's only 2 more episodes left, and we know that the next one is going to have at least one, my guess is, part of that episode is going to be a flashback, based on how this episode ends. Like a huge part is my guess. So I'm really curious. Like I don't know what it's transitioning to. It doesn't feel like that much is going to happen this season. My guess is we're not even going to have a full episode with Abby this season. My guess is like we'll probably glimpse her at the end of the season. Is my guess, but like that's going to be it.
My new prediction is that this season ends with her discovering a concrete way to get to Abby, and then pan up as her like she looks over whatever that architecture, whatever building that is, whatever the path is in front of her, and then it's the path to Abby is what we leave on. But this season does not have enough. There are too many factions. There's too many elements. There's just not enough time to like decently flesh. I mean, we'll get into it as we talk about it. But I have deep concerns about this season's ability to actually deal with all the things that it's juggling. And I was worried about it in the beginning, and all of those worries are, I feel like, they're bearing fruit as we head towards the end.
We start the episode with Hanrahan in the WLF. She's interrogating an Asian soldier who's in trouble, Elise Park. And she's asking her, like, why did you kill some of your own men, including Leon, who, by the way, seems to be this really super badass guy. And Elise then tells a story about how she's supposed to secure the hospital, including the basement levels B1, B2, B3. But the cordyceps are on those levels. But it's like, there's some infected there. Who cares? Not a big deal. But Leon, one of her best soldiers, calls in from B2, struggling to breathe. He says the cordyceps are in the air.
He said it's in the air.
Which is like something that has never been what they've encountered in the past. So she left him there to die. And also, major twist, Leon is Elise's son.
No!
Okay, like, all joking aside, I do think this is a pretty cool way of introducing this concept. It's like, there's many ways you could introduce the concept of the cordyceps are in the air. And the way they chose was, let's tie it to somebody who actually has emotional stakes in this, as opposed to like a news story or a radio broadcast. It's like, warning, cordyceps are now in the air. This is a kind of a cool way. They wrote this little scene and they played it out, and then it kind of pays off a little bit later on in the episode. Pretty cool way of doing exposition, I thought. Patrick, what do you think?
I agree. Regular check-in with a normal person, my wife, when this reveal happens, audible gasp. Like audible gasp, like, oh my God, this like completely transforms like where the dangers are and like how you think about the environment around you. And I actually think the two actors in this scene, again, they're doing kind of an exposition sort of dump or reveal for the audience. I think they sell how shook everyone is by the concept that it could be airborne, and they have spent. How long are we in the infected world at this point? What's the timeline? I forget.
It's 2029, right?
2003 is when it starts, right? So
what'd you say?
2003 is that when?
I thought it was 2013.
2013. Either way, like we're decent. This isn't like a couple of years ago. Like there is a sense of there are rules.
Yes, and infection day is outbreak day is 2013, and we're in 2029 in the show. So it's been 16 years.
Yeah, like 15 years, like of like here are rules. Here's how like we've built society, our version of society around these dangers, these rules, our understandings of how X, Y, and Z works. And, try to situate yourself back in early days of COVID as ever like stuff like that started to sink in. I think they're going for a similar sort of like feel there of like, we had an understanding of like how this stuff happened, how we protect ourselves. That's all out, like that's all gone now. And like that just leaking through the vents. There's a lot of really interesting ways they could go with this particular revelation, and where they, we'll get to it in talking about later parts of the episode. But man, the way they sell what it's like to get infected that way is one of the more upsetting depictions of having to give in to a world of viral infections. I've watched many infection stories, and like how it is depicted in this show is particularly upsetting later on.
I have to say the way it's brought to life is really incredible. Like just seeing the particles in the air is really cool looking, and I don't know how they achieved it with CG or practical or whatever, but it looks amazing. Patrick Klepek, if you had your choice between being Last of Us infected, super violent, running through the night, tearing people apart zombie, or Last of Us infected, you kind of become absorbed into the wall full of other cordyceps, which one would you choose?
It's question, which we don't have answered, but the thing about when they go when Ellie goes to the sequence later in the episode and encounters people like who like breathed in the spores and kind of became part of the environment. Or at least I can't say that I didn't think about it this way. It wasn't clear to me where they were as a level of consciousness.
Right.
Like, I feel like the show leaves a seed of doubt as to whether like it's possible they're still there in some capacity, breathing in like the way it's depicted is like they breathe in and then they breathe out spores. And I can't tell if there's any life there. No one really knows obviously what happens when you get traditionally infected either, but there's no sign of life from a traditional infected. You look at those people on the walls,
like no sign of your former self.
No, and there's and there's nothing here where someone says like, "Help me," but all I could think of, I don't know if this is true. But like that sequence felt very much molded after like the original Alien and like different sequences where like people like get infected by the xenomorph and then become sort of part of the architecture as they like sort of birth a creature. And there's moments in Alien, some of those haunting are when they come across somebody who is just like, they're still there, but they're just being transformed as they go through this process. And so, let me get bitten. Let me turn into a smart little goofy infected that's scattering up on the walls, brain gone, but my body's out there having a good time, getting some exercise, doing some cardio, whereas like stuck in a wall for hundreds of years, breathing in and out spores. Ugh. No,
100%. I'm in the same boat. Like at least in one, you're out there, you're in the arena, as they say.
I have a chance to die. Okay, let's say there's a world where you get infected and you can't control anything that's going on. Like it's all bloodthirst, and like you're responding to the way that you were transformed. But like you might die. Like the people just seal off the spores and go, well, we're just not going to look at that. It seems like there's at least an opportunity where if you were set like some form of consciousness as a traditional infected, someone might shoot you in the head eventually. Whereas with the spores, you'd
have the sweet release of a bullet in the head.
Yes,
in the former.
I'll take that.
Outcome,
100%.
Yeah. Same. So we're more alike than we are different, Patrick Klepek.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna have to add that to my list as I get older. Like if the infection occurs,
put that on your advanced directives. All right. At the Pinnacle Theater, Dina and Ellie have put together a plan to reach Nora on the 5th floor of the hospital, which involves cutting through this long building of unknown provenance. They also determined that the Scars don't use technology because the WLF are broadcasting all their troop movements openly on radios. So they're like, hey, why would they do that unless the Scars probably don't use radios or anything like that? So then they start trekking through Seattle, and Dina tells a story of the first person she killed, which is a raider who murdered her mother and sister, because they see the WLF have executed a bunch of Scars, and it's like brutal. And Ellie's like, "What? Why did I bring you here? You're pregnant. We can't do this," And it is an open question of why are you forcing a pregnant woman to go through all this?
You brought this up last week.
Yeah. So the way the show explains this is Dina has personal investment in people getting revenge because she got revenge and that was very good for her. And so it's like
healthy.
It's clearly a healthy part of the healing process. I'm being facetious. But yeah, they essentially say like, hey, Dina is invested in this and she knows she's pregnant, but it doesn't matter because she wants, like, because of her own experience with tragedy and people killing her family, like she understands Ellie's position and therefore is willing to support Ellie no matter what. Any thoughts on this whole backstory, Patrick Klepek?
I love this actor.
Yes.
I didn't really buy. There was something off about how she told that story. I don't know. Like it was. I guess I expected it to land more from like it's a really sad story, but I don't know. There's just something off about what happened there. I don't have like a great way of articulating or putting my finger on it, but I think part of it might have been informed by I wonder what you make of the question that Dina poses at the end. It's like, do you want me to come with, or should I go home? Which is sort of a weird question to dump on Ellie.
I think it's kind of interesting because it feels like the show is trying to say almost like there's no right answer here. That's what I think. That's kind of what the show's trying to do. Because Dina
says that explicitly. She's like, it's part of the question. Like there isn't a right answer to how you respond to this.
And I kind of appreciate that because I think she's kind of right. Like that you could make a very reasonable argument either way, and that each approach has different advantages. But yeah, I don't know, man. Like, is that story enough reason to think that Dina would want to keep going out there killing Joel's killers? Maybe. Is it enough to convince Ellie that they should keep doing it? Like, I don't know. I'm a little on the fence about it, but yeah, I think it's also difficult to imagine an 8-year-old killing a raider. That's another thing that's like they don't show it. They don't do like a flashback or anything. So yeah, I'm a little bit on the fence with you, Patrick. So all that said, I do want to do another Dave's Seattle Corner. Where I talk about some of the stuff that's going on in Seattle. One thing I wanted to mention was, first of all, last week on the podcast, I did not mention that plainly visible in the back of on a awning in one of the stores was a banner for Scarecrow Video, which is one of the largest independent video stores in the world. And actually, if you go on YouTube and search for Scarecrow Video, like one of the most viewed videos about Scarecrow Video is still one that David Chen, made, which will walk you through like all the cool stuff they have at Scarecrow Video. But have they're like tens of thousands of movies and TV shows on DVD and stuff like that. So it's incredible. The reason I didn't spot it is because it was like kind of at an angle and very distorted. This week, not too much Seattle specific stuff, but you do see these iconic Westin towers in the background. The Westin Hotel is a very iconic looking hotel. It kind of looks like the corn cob things in your Chicago place, Patrick. You know those little corn cob towers. We have like something that looks like that. It's like these Westin Hotel towers, and you kind of see a little bit of that in the background of one of the thing in one of the shots, and that's basically it for Seattle this week. So that's
okay.
A very brief Dave Seattle corner.
Bum, 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 bum.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. So they decide to keep going. At night, they reach this building that they're trying to get through, and they encounter a stalker, and then they're surrounded by stalkers. And it's actually a really well done scene. I thought, because you're like, oh, one stalker, like Dina is terrified by like one stalker. They're like, holy shit! Like, oh, how are we gonna do one stalker? This is gonna be like really difficult. And then there's like 8 stalkers, and it's like, holy shit! Like they're completely screwed.
Part of what I liked about this scene is I think it is challenging for this show to do what is standardized in a video game, which is like introduce variance, because a game needs variety in its enemies because it's a video game, and you just like need to give the player different things to do, different ways to stress test them. That can feel like a little, like it felt a little odd, like even in season 1 when like the bloater emerges for the first time. It's like, oh, here's a boss, and like maybe that didn't read that way to an average person, but for me, it was a little eye rolly. Like, oh, okay, like I guess we're introducing another version of it. I don't know. It was just a little odd, but I thought this like smarter version worked for me. I felt like its introduction seeded very early in the season, and then really paid off here. Like, it worked really well for me. And it worked as a really excellent counter to like Ellie's buff, basically, which is like, well, I can take a bite. It's like, yeah, but you can still be torn to shreds. Like,
right.
That's not invulnerability. And the moment they are overwhelmed by, like, Dina's whole point, like, this is reckless. And then they walk into, like, why are the WLF avoiding this, like, this building? For a reason. And you're being reckless. You did something reckless. And by all accounts, they should have died in that encounter.
Yeah. But Jesse shows up, saves the day. Turns out he and Tommy both came to save Ellie and Dina and bring them back. So they're both out there. We don't see Tommy, though. We just see Jesse this episode. They run away, but the WLF sees them, and so they need to escape into a park, which for some reason the WLF does not go into. It's like, I wonder why they don't go into the park. Well, they find out rather quickly that the park is riddled with scars. And we watch them execute someone in a ritualistic ceremony. So then they realize they're surrounded. They make a run for it. Ellie tells Tommy and Dina to meet back at the theater. And then we can talk about the Ellie and Nora stuff momentarily. But yeah, this is our first real introduction to scar violence. And I have to say, it is really horrifying. It's extremely graphic. Again, more graphic in the show than I think it is in the game, in my opinion. There's a very similar scene in the game, and you see it from much farther away. In this, it's like much more like lingering on all the horror of what's happening here. But yeah, any thoughts on this intro to the scars, Patrick Klepek?
I thought it was pretty cheesy.
Really?
Yeah, it was, normie check-in. It worked really well for my wife. She was suitably spooked. The scene seemed to work for her, but
it worked for me as well.
I think that, like, the ritual the ritual killing, like, I thought that was, but like the moment we're in the woods and running around with the torches and the whistling, I don't know. It just didn't. There's something different about in the video game, like the perspective you have over like a similar sort of sequence where you're like, the way a camera works in a video game is like hovered above the character, and you have like a sense of place that you don't have in a television show, because it's it's an authored camera view as opposed to a video game where you are the author of the camera view. And I don't know, it just didn't. I think on some level I did find it cheesy. It didn't work for me as well as I think the scene was attempting to pull off. But more to the point, there's just not enough time to give to the Seraphites, to the WLF, and like we're just, if we're doing any measure of like a flashback in the coming episode, okay, well, there's no time
right
for that next episode. And then even if the finale is super stuffed, like an hour and 30 minutes, like a movie length, like sort of conclusion, in what world are we going to establish any meaningful characters from the Seraphites? Is like Abby going to show up at all? Is Isaac is he has like one really important sequence here. See you next season. Like it's just part of the reason it didn't work for me, because I think it crystallized an issue I have with this season in general, which is just you don't have time to give oxygen to all the other stuff that is happening here. I think it makes the only choice it really can, which is to focus on Ellie and Dina. Like none of the other stuff works at all, regardless how much time you give it, unless you buy in to Ellie and Dina's journey. So if you're going to spend your time, you spend it with them. But it just feels overstuffed, and there's just not enough characterization and weight given to these other factions in a way that I think is satisfying for how late we are into the season and how much importance they have on what is happening to Ellie and Dina.
Patrick, it seems like I'm more positive on this episode than you. That's not how
I liked
thought
everything else, but like this sequence really put into picture, I think, when I look back on this season. I can't make a grand prediction yet, but like we've only got 2 left. That it feels there's just not enough room. Like an hour is a long time, but a video game is 20 plus hours. Like it's just a different beast.
I am surprised that like we had speculated in our bonus episode, which is available for decodingtv.com paid subscribers, where we compare the video game to the show, that like this season they were not going to show things from the Seraphite perspective at all, because so far they haven't shown any Seraphites until this scene, and all you've seen is the Seraphites being oppressed and murdered. That's all you've seen until this point, really. Although they did like string up those WLF on the thing, but like you never saw that happen. And so now they're showing like how vicious they are, and so I am surprised that they decided to go there. I agree with you that like we don't really meet any Seraphites. We get some sense of their ideology. They have this prophet that they paint up on walls, and they say "Feel her love," and they talk about being guided by the prophet, and they seem to not use modern technology. And I did appreciate this scene actually worked for me. I liked the contrast between literally the color of the lights from the WLF versus like the torchlight in the forest. Like it's a really cool visual contrast. So I was surprised at how it played out, but it was a cool kind of like introduction to like what the Seraphites are really, really like, beyond just, again, them stringing up those bodies at the TV station a couple episodes ago. So anyway, sorry it didn't work for you, but let's talk about what happens at the end of the episode. Ellie finds and confronts Nora, who won't tell her where Abby is and is pretty unrepentant about Joel's death. She chases Nora down to level B2 where the Spores are alive. She also finds Leon, Elise's son from the opening scene. Ellie confronts Nora, who is dying from the Spores. And Nora explains that Joel killed everyone at the hospital, including Abby's dad. Ellie begins beating Nora to death with a pipe as the episode comes to an end. And then we see that we're going to have a flashback to Joel and Ellie when Joel was still alive, however long ago. And that's going to be next episode. So that's the end of the episode. Pretty brutal stuff, gotta say. And like Nora being unrepentant about Joel's death, that's a cool moment. That happens both in the game and the show in virtually identical fashion. So it's like a shock when it happens, because it's like, oh, you think she's gonna she's gonna have some regret, but nope, they're really glad that Joel died. The thing that, and I think like Ellie kind of torturing or beating Nora to death, like that all kind of makes sense to me. The only one beat in this whole sequence that I felt a little inauthentic to me was when Nora explains to Ellie what Joel did. I think this is the first time that Ellie is hearing that information explained to her, or like hearing the Abby connection. Is that right? I think that's right. Right?
I think what you're supposed to take away from that scene is that she knows why Joel did what she did. She didn't know why Abby did what she
Right.
did. But it is
Exactly.
not. But it is. I think
because she sees like she's like, oh, I basically understand kind of what you said, right? Like,
right, but that's a big deal from the audience's perspective.
Right.
Like, you've been wondering, like to what extent in like the time jump we get between the first season and second season. At any point, because the first season ends, with I think a very understandable interpretation of the final scene of The Last of Us season 1 is that Ellie is choosing to accept a lie and not interrogate what Joel has told her.
Right.
Because of that parental sort of relationship. She's like, I'm going to trust that like this father figure has made the right decision and we're just all going to move forward. And I think, like what we don't get answered between now and this moment is, did she ever reevaluate that decision to just swallow any follow-up questions about what happened at the hospital? And it's clear here, absent like a surprise that Ellie is just bullshitting. I don't think we're supposed to feel that way. I think the takeaway is an equal surprise to Nora. Like, oh, you knew, and you're doing this anyway. Mm-hmm. As it gets, certainly one of the running,
because she says the words that Ellie says are "I know." Like she says the words "I know."
Says it with confidence. There does not no blinking. No, like it is like. No, that is not new information to me, like sweetheart. I knew that like walking into this room, but that's a shock to the audience because I think in the same way that you expect Nora to show some sort of contrition, or I think she plays that scene like awesome. Like the sequence where Ellie sneaks up on her, like the way the actor plays that is great. Like really sells the like, ooh, and then like tosses like alcohol, I think at Ellie to temporarily give her a chance to escape. So I this moment, I thought Bella Ramsey played it brilliantly. I think like she really sells what is a critical moment in the storytelling of The Last of Us Part 2, which is a moment where we're supposed to look at this character fundamentally differently. And I think she really sells this moment in which I think she's been suppressing how she feels, and now she's given an opportunity to act on how she really feels, and she does so in one of the most violent fashions possible, in which she could have just shot this woman. She could have blunt hit her in the head and just ended it. But she's going to give her a feeling of what Joel had. Now, granted, Nora, not sure you had to say, like, sometimes I dream about those screams. Like, as he was dying, like, really just, like, tossing it back in Ellie's face. But this sequence really, either, like, looked incredible. Like, the red, like, there's a lot of good red lighting this season. The subway sequence and this hallway sequence, especially after the haunting walkthrough of all the spores, is, like, one of my favorite visuals that I, like, in the whole show so far. So, I bought this like hook, line, and sinker. I buy Ellie cracking to a certain degree. And if next episode's ends up being a flashback after, Joel walks in and says, "Hey, kiddo," it's just taking you to emotionally such a different place that I'm starting to see some of the dominoes they're trying to set up with these, questions about cycles of violence. What is justice? How do we resolve, our emotions over the people we lose and how we lose them? And, it may, for all my issues with some of the storytelling in this season, I thought I came out of that moment being like, "Fuck yeah, like let's go."
Fair enough. You've made me see things a little bit differently, Patrick, and I appreciate that. I want to say the moment that gives me chills is when Nora says, like that is an iconic moment for me when she's like, "You're like," she realizes. Yeah. Oh, like Ellie is like Ellie is legend. Like Ellie has her reputation.
She's a prophet. Like it takes like a mythical sort of.
She could have been. She could have been. Because she's immune, right? And so I really love that moment, and Ellie coming up to her and she's like, "You've killed us both," and she's like, "Did I? Is that what I did?" Kind of some cool moments there.
That's so mean. We've never really seen her weaponize her immunity in that way. And it was that was chilling.
Yeah. Also, in the show, it wasn't Ellie's idea to come down to B2, I don't think.
No.
Nora was running away and kind of like wandered into this place. So anyway,
well, and then you hear like briefly like some of the WLF be like, "Oh no, they went down to B2." Well, I assume maybe they sealed it, right? Like we don't know the whole rule set of the Spores yet. The one thing we got in the early episode exposition dump was like, well, it doesn't seem to have climbed through the vents, or else we all would be sick. And so we have some like it does appear to be localized to like where it occurs. Like it's not like it's traveling, but I wonder if there will be consequences for the opening of that elevator in a way that we have not seen quite yet.
Yeah. But anyway, fair enough. Nuclear information that like when Ellie says "I know," like that she is aware of at least some of the details here and has been concealing them for obvious reasons from everyone around her. And undoubtedly, we will learn more implications about that in future episodes. So, anyway, any other thoughts, Patrick Klepek, on this episode?
Individually, I thought this episode was incredibly strong. Gives me some faith about how this show is thinking about Ellie's journey relative to my concerns about Ellie's journey in the video game. Like one specific is Ellie hasn't killed that many people. This is why there's like a conversation with Dina and Ellie about like their kills. And we've talked about this, like what they call ludonarrative dissonance in video games, which is like your character, stacks like whole stadiums full of bodies, but then the cutscene version of that character is treated differently. And in the show, Ellie has not killed a lot of infected, but has not killed that many people. And part of Ellie's journey is like each of those has weight. And
I think stab that guy in the neck last week, and that did not have that much weight. But but in general, I agree with you that, by this point in the game, Ellie has killed like 50, 100, 200 people. And so they really give this one a lot of significance.
Yeah. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.